Hello YouTube, it's Dos Gregor. This is part 2 of the Gentoo installation and handbook overview. And we have completed pretty much everything from going over the installation media to starting up, booting into it, completing the partitioning and formatting of the partitions. And we're at that point now where we're going to be downloading the tarball and going forward with that. Now, I did clean up some of my information here, and we just have the handbook now open and our quick install guide too, but we're mainly going to be looking here at the handbook. So we move on down here about using the stage from the internet. Now, back in the day when I first started doing this, you actually had to do everything from the bootstrap, and I always used stage 1 and stage 2 tarballs back then, and I think I used stage 1 more often than I used stage 2. So it took forever because you pretty much built your system from the ground up. Nowadays we got the lazy man's ability where it lays down pretty much your core functionality with a stage 3 tarball, and we go from there. So right now we have changed directory into the Mount Gentoo area, and we don't need to worry about our proxies. So we move on down here. Now we need to get into this area right here. So I don't think I can cut and paste this, but I'm going to try first just to see if it lets me cut and paste. It does not let me cut and paste. Oh, it'd be nice if I could. But alright. So we type in links, http www.gentoo.org/main/en/mirrors.xml, and let's make sure that my internet is working. So one moment, because I saw it bounce up and down. Ugh, as you can see, my network's unreachable again. That drives me nuts. I wish I had something better. Okay, got my network back on there. You know, it's a bad design flaw with this HP DV8T and their push button. Just terrible. I've explained in a few of my things. So we've typed all that in. Hopefully it didn't put any bad errors in there. We hit enter, it goes to links, and voila, alright. So what we need to do is scroll down here to downloads. We need to go to the architecture we're going to be looking at, which is the ISO area for AMD 64, which I assume you probably could have hit the other. We come on down here. What we need is the stage 3 AMD tarball right there, and we're going to use 64-bit. Now if you need a 32-bit, it's down below, but we're going to go ahead and click on that. We're going to save that, and we're going to just let it go. Now that's going to download for a little bit. It's 167. It says that it might take about 3 minutes, almost 4. It's going to speed up. It'll go real fast. I'm going to go ahead and pause it for now so you don't have to worry about that. Save some time. Okay, we've downloaded that section. It took about 2.5 minutes. And now that we've downloaded that, we go on down. We don't need to worry, unless you're doing proxies, you may want to look at some of this stuff here about the proxy settings. But for the most part, we don't need to worry about that. If you also want to check the security on that and the checksums, it shows you and tells you what to do so that you can also do that and verify that. But we're going to come on down to unpacking that stage tarball. We don't need to be in here anymore, so we'll just hit escape and bring up the menu there and exit out. Now we are in Mount Gentoo, and if we do an ls, we should see that we've got that boot directory we created, our lost and found, and our stage 3 tarball. Now here we need to extract it, so we hit tar xvjpf and then stage, and then you should be able to hit if you start typing it proper, the tab key, bring it on over, and we hit enter, and it starts to go ahead and extract that inside of your root of your SDA2. That's going to take a little bit of time, so once again I will pause the video so that we can keep this to a minimal. Okay, now everything's extracted. Minimize this again. If you ever want to know how long a process is taking you to do, if you type in time at the beginning of it, at the end of the process it's going to give you some information about how long it took to actually do that. That can be really handy if you're needing to compile a very large program and you want to know how long did it take it, so that you have an idea for the next time how much time it's going to be to get that taken care of. And we'll be using that command a little bit later just so we get some ideas of how long things are taking us to install. So we've unpacked that, and if we do an ls now of the system, we'll see that now we have a lot more directory structure, and we have pretty much what you should see in a normal case. Well, the next thing we want to do is we need to set up the make.conf flags, and it talks about the C flags and the CXX flags, so we need to edit that. So we do a nano-w/mnt/gentoo etc. Now remember to do that fully qualification there, because if you don't and you do a /etc, you're actually going to be editing the make.conf file inside of your boot media, because we haven't rooted into this yet. You want to make sure that you go into portage, because they did change the location of make.conf from etc to portage. And here is their example. Now what I like to do, since I already have a make.conf file and a location, is I like to go in and take a quick look at mine. And I've got my ping kind of going so I know whether or not I lost network connectivity. And we go into here, for instance, and we do a nano-w/etc make.conf. And that's right, because I am so used to doing it the old way that I forget too that they've moved it. Alright, so here's my make.conf, and really this works really well. I don't have too many problems with these sort of settings, but we want to look at this, for instance, and look at the CX flags and just see how it looks. And as you see, that's exactly the same, and the same thing for the CXX flags. I sometimes don't like to see all of this extra junk. I mean, if you need it for yourself, otherwise I get rid of it. So let's go in here. Get rid of that. Now the C host, that's pretty much going to be the same. And we don't need this stuff here. So they use the bin dist, MMX, SSE, and SSSE2. That's default. And I'm going to go ahead and add my stuff in here that I like to use, because I like to make sure Python is being programmed there at the beginning. And I also like to make sure that if I'm going to use Chromium, that ICU is in there. We've got that. The port dir should remain the same. The disk dir and the package dir, those look like they're new because I don't even have those. But another feature that I like to make sure that I put into mine is that accept underscore default underscore ops equals dash dash auto unmask dash write. Just saves me one extra step. Now because I do that, I always want to make sure I use the dash A command on a new package so that it doesn't automatically just do that, and it asks me first if it wants to do it. Another thing that I like to do is the accept license issue, so I don't have to deal with those later down the road. So I do an accept underscore license equals quotation star and at EULA, because like I've said, who's not going to accept the EULA, and does it really make a difference? Since I'm not sure about the video cards for now and the input devices, and those are more for a GUI, and then if you're going to do layman, which is allowing you to pull in external portage sources, then that's what the source would be for, but we're not going to worry about that for now. The only other option that we're going to want to put up here with the rest of this, right before like I put my options, is the make ops. So make OPTS equals quotation. Now this is where you're going to put how many cores you want it to use, and I got my caps, for compiling. Now I gave this system, for instance, 6 cores to play with. Now you want to use the whole idea a lot of times of the number of cores you have plus 1 or 2. In this case I've got 6, so I'm just going to go ahead and do 7. And you can see in mine I've got 8 cores set up, and I'm kind of pushing it a little bit by telling it to use 10 cores. So I tell it negative J7 for that, and I just kind of go over that real quick. Your Gentoo mirrors, those are really good to have if you're finding that you're getting slow response time, and there is some information about how you can find out which mirrors are best for you. And for now, that's all we really need. I don't think that there's anything else that we need to set up. And like I said, I don't like all of these extra items being in there. You don't really need them. It's always good to comment and make remarks. If you want to remember, for instance, a remark for the make ops file, and that's what it's for, then you can put something like that for you. But a lot of times you just don't need that. So we're going to save that and make sure it writes it to it, and we've done that. Let's go ahead and minimize this, get back to our area here. This is going to explain a little bit more too about what those O flags are for GCC, and that the -02 is the recommended default. If you're having problems, you want to use a -03. It changes the way it builds it with the debugging and so forth. And I've really had no trouble at all using the -02. Now remember, that's an O, not a 0. We move on down here, and it explains, of course, what those C flags are. Here's where it talks about your make ops, and it talks too about how many parallel compilations should occur at once, and this is the number of CPUs of your system plus 1. Like I said, sometimes you can put 1 or 2 in there. I threw 2 in for mine, but and it may not do anything. Maybe it's only using it at 9 because I have 8. Try it out. Now, when I talked about the mirrors, this is where it talks about selecting mirrors and having those put in. For now, I'm not going to worry about mirrors because it does have some built-in ones that work just fine. And here's where you're going to need to get some information from how it booted up, getting, for instance, your resolve information. So what we want to do here is do CP for copy, capital L, /etc, because we're getting this from our boot media, the resolve file, and we're going to copy that to our mount Gentoo etc resolve.conf. And what that does is that pretty much sets you up where DNS is looking for to get to your internet. Now we need to mount the necessary file systems so that we can chroot into our new system. So we do a mount -t procedure proc, that's PROC, none on the mount point, /mnt/gentoo/ proc. We do the same thing for the system and dev, except we use a mount --r bind to bind those, /sys /mnt Gentoo sys, and mount --r bind the dev /mount Gentoo dev. And here is where we're going to get into the system. So what you do is you do I do believe, and I thought you had to change it to the root, but it's not having you do that. So we're not going to worry about it since it didn't tell us to do it. chroot /mount /gentoo /bin space and then /bin /bash, because we're going to be using the bash environment, which I believe that is the born again shell. And then we do a source command to tell it where to get its profile information. And because we have now set mount /gentoo to be root, we're looking at etc profile instead of mount Gentoo etc profile. And if you wanted to change your prompt the way it looks, you could do that so that it says chroot and the rest. I think it's fine. I don't usually mess with that, and we're good to go. Now we need to install a portage snapshot. Portage is the system that Gentoo uses to install and to have all of the repository for its file systems. Now I also noticed that I've lost network connectivity again, so I will need to pause because this is going to require that, and we'll move on. Okay, network connectivity is restored. So I've talked about before how you can update Portage by doing an emerge --sync, or you can use this emerge -webrsync to go a different route. So it's suggesting we do that, so that's what we're going to do here. We're doing emerge, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw that time command at the front of it so we can see how long it takes in this environment to go ahead and set up. And I did something wrong here, because what did I miss? It says that the port directory is empty. Did I forget to do something up here? I'm going to pause it to make sure that I didn't forget something, because that should not have happened. I didn't see anything that I may have missed, so I'm going to see what happens if I just, before I do anything to rectify this, I want to see what happens if I do an emerge --sync. That seems to work okay without any issues. So something might be wrong with the WebRSync program, and I think that maybe if I would have gone ahead, I noticed that portage directory didn't exist just yet. So if I would have made the portage directory by doing an mkdir /user/portage, it may have worked without an issue. But that's the first time I saw an error like that pop up, and I did notice that the portage directory didn't exist just yet. Looking through the handbook, there was nothing about having to manually create that directory. So we're just going to go ahead and let this go through. I did put that time command. It'll take about the same amount of time, and we'll pause it till it's ending. Okay, now the emerge --sync has completed. Gotten through everything here. It took 3 minutes to do that, and we have everything installed, so we move on. And if you remember one of my articles that I did about news items, it now says we should look at the news items because there are 6 new ones. And if we do an eSelect news list, we will see what is there. Now it talks about here the portage config, protect if modified default, the make.conf and make.profile move, Python targets, portage preserve libs default, languages, or separate user on Linux requiring init ramfs. Now, these are not going to be the same ones that you may run into, and depending upon when you build, it's always good to look at these so that you can do an eSelect and then do news and then read. And if you just want to do option 1, 2, 3, you just say read 1, read 2, or I think you can do an all, and it's going to bring them all up and you can kind of go through them. Now I'm not going to go through them right now because, like I said, that doesn't really have much to do with what we're doing right now. It may for you, so always pay attention to that. We move on about choosing the correct profile. Now this is really important because your profiles set default use flags and other parameters to make the system optimized for the type of computer you're building. Now, if we do an eSelect profile list, you will see that they have anything from a generic AMD 13.0, which is what we're currently using, to a desktop, to desktop for GNOME or GNOME, a GNOME environment using systemd, KDE as KDE systemd, a developer box if you're going to be doing that, no multi-lib so that you don't have any 32-bit. Here's a 32-bit version of it, a 64-bit. Now these hardens are, so what it means to be hardened means that everything should be, you're not going to have any packages that could cause some problems. It's going to be as stable as possible with hardened. But for now, we're going to use a desktop environment, maybe someday, I don't know. So I would suggest we go with 13 desktop because we don't know if we're going to be using a GNOME or a KDE or XFCE. So I'm going to be setting that to 3. So to do that, eSelect profile set 3. And in their example here, they're talking about also the desktop. Their number 2 is actually desktop. Now, and it also says here, if you want to have a pure 64-bit environment with no 32-bit applications or libraries, which I don't like because there are some things that just a 32-bit that you need, then it talks about how you then should select one of the no multi-libs profiles. And then if you want to make sure that it did it correctly, you can do an eSelect list again. And we should now see that number 3 is defaulted with the little blue asterisks. Now moving on. Now this is a really good document here to look at in your user portage profiles area. Now, there is actually a description of all the use flags that can help you out. Now we've already done this part here because I told you I like to keep my use flags as minimal as possible in the make.conf and use everything going towards the applications. So we really don't have to worry about that part. But if, for instance, you didn't want any GNOME or GDK, you could do a negative GDK, a negative GNOME. If you're doing a KDE environment, for instance, you'd want Qt4 and KDE to be built into everything. Since we don't know which direction we're going to go, though, we're going to leave those blank for now. But if you wanted, for instance, every program to be built with, say, ALSA support, or with DVD support, or CDR support, you're going to put that inside of your global make use flags. Otherwise, you'll be setting your use flags inside of etc portage packages .use, and those are package specific use flags, which I think is a much better way to go. The next thing it has us do here is setting up the time zone. So if you look at ls user share zone information, you're going to find the time zone that you're looking for. So if we go back into here and do ls/user share zone info, if we hit the tab key, it's going to show us all the different countries that we can go to. You pick the one that you want to go to. For instance, it's America, and I know, for instance, that Phoenix is there, and I know that that's the one I'm going to want to use. So what we need to do with that is do an echo, and we're going to do America. If I can spell America. Now, is it Americas or just America? Okay, yeah, it's just America / Phoenix. And we're going to create the file with that little greater than symbol to /etc/time zone. Now, a good rule of thumb to think about when you're doing that, if you want to replace everything in a file, you'll use that single greater than sign. If you want to append to the file, use a double greater than sign. And I'm not sure if there's a special character set for what that means, like a pipe command, which is this right here. But that's how I always think of it. So we've done that. It also says we can update our time zone information, and it wants us to reconfigure the data packages. So what we'll do next is we'll do an emerge. I've never used a -- config, I think, but because it asks us to do that, we're going to do that exactly the way it says. So we want to do a -- config libs/time zone -data. Okay. And I see that pretty much did is set up our etc local time with that same information. The next area that we want to set up is our locale generator. Now this is going to be different for you based upon the country that you're going to or that you're in. So what we want to do here is we want to edit the file /etc locals.gen. Now here are just a few, and if you know which ones you need, you can uncomment them. For instance, in my situation, I just want to use the US area. If you're in Japan or UK, Hong Kong, etc., you want to look for that. Italy, France. If you know what yours is, Espanol, etc., you want to set that up and just uncomment the locations that you would want to be able to use. After you've uncommented those two, you save it with a Control X, yes, that you want to save it, enter that you want to save it as the same name, and now we type in local-gen, and it should go ahead and create those. Now you don't need to do too much if you just had a couple, which is really helpful, because that sure beats having to do a whole bunch, because there's no reason to create the locale for the whole entire world if all you're going to be using is your local language and your local setup. Well, we move on that you can set a system-wide locale setting with eSelect locale list. So just like we did with the profiles, you could do an eSelect locale list, and that's now going to show you that you can choose from C, POSIX, ENUS, etc., etc. And we could, for instance, go ahead and set 3, for instance, for myself, or 5 for UTF-8. Now we're just going to go ahead and just set the default to ENUS for myself. You can also do this manually, as it shows here, setting up in the /etc environment.d or envd.d o2 locale, and you can set these manually for yourself as well. Now that we've changed our profile, we need to update our environment and the profile. So we do an env-update, and if we want to run two commands at once, we do the ampersand, type in source, and we're going to do the /etc profile, because now etc profile is pointing to the new location of our profile. That regenerates everything and sets everything up. Now you can also run those two commands separately by just doing an env-update, and then after it's done, do source/etc profile. Now before we get into the kernel, because that's going to be a pretty big one, I'm sure we're pretty much at 30 minutes or more, and we are. So I'm going to pause the video now, stop it for this section, and in the next video we will look at the kernel and move forward. Thank you for watching. If you're having, if it's morning, evening, noon, or night, got to put that in there. Whatever you're having, enjoy it. Keep watching. Do look for part 3 as we get into the kernel. We're getting there. There's only 10 options altogether, so the kernel might be its own, but we'll see. We'll just keep on going until we get our system completed and we can boot into it. So until next time, bye.